we're now going to move on to chapter 2, which is called not the denominator, but the dominator. And stated at the top of the page is, in Britain, 112 women a year are killed by a male partner or former partner, Home Office statistics 2007. In Britain, 22 men a year are killed by a female partner or former partner, Home Office 2007. Those figures may well be correct. I think a more up-to-date figure for the number of women that are killed is somewhere around the 75 to 78 mark. But noticeably omitted is the number of children that get killed by their parents, which comes to about 65 children per year. And of those 65 children that are killed per year by parents, at least 65 children, those are the ones that certainly are discovered, if you like, they're killed in more or less equal numbers by mothers and fathers. Okay, and the very young children tend to be killed by the mother, and the older children tend to be killed by the father. Just an interesting little additional statistic, and also flagging up the fact that all of this is focused at violence against women rather than violence against children, which in many respects needs to be the firmest focus, because that leaves us away from this potential gender war which is going on.
Absolutely. These deaths are all tragedies, aren't they?
Absolutely.
They're absolute tragedies.
Yeah.
And what worries me so much is that I don't think we properly understand why these deaths are happening.
Yeah.
I think we have a misunderstanding of why they're happening, and that has serious consequences for the treatment
of the individuals involved.
Exactly.
Yes, I agree entirely with that.
Yeah.
I think some of the attachment theory begins to look at the differences between securely attached and insecurely and anxiously attached individuals and avoidant individuals, and that some much greater study of that is required. There's a great deal of research being carried out on attachment theory, and I think that can certainly lead to much better potential outcomes by therapists and others working in this domain.
And I would say, along with trauma theory and developmental trauma and life experience trauma, these are kind of important factors, aren't they?
I think that's right. And another of the difficulties is that everything is being brought under the male power and control idea as well.
Yes.
So within the chapter then, she focuses on the dominator is his name and controlling women is his game. So we have the sexual controller, the king of the castle, the bad father, the liar, the persuader, the head worker, the jailer, and the bully. A little bit later, I noticed that there's not a saint, not a saint that we are seeing, just a decent human being. So this is, the small minority of men that exist.
There's a polarising here, isn't there? Which I think is really unhelpful.
Yeah.
And those terms are all so derogatory.
Yes, that's right.
All of them.
Yeah.
And they're a mirror, aren't they, for the old power and control wheel. On the power and control wheel, there were 8 different ways in which men abuse women, and they've just been transferred to different characters now, haven't they?
That's exactly right.
Yeah, so it's exactly the same.
Yeah, and the woman that developed the power and control wheel was the late Ellen Pence.
Yes.
And in her book here, which I don't know whether that can be seen, but this was what she said in 19...
Hold it a bit closer.
Well, yes, I think, I think that's probably okay. What she said here on page 28-29 was, the power and control wheel, which was developed by battered women attending men's groups, was originally a description of typical behaviours accompanying the violence. In effect, it said, when he is violent, he gets power and he gets control. Somewhere early in this, in our organising our efforts, however, we changed the message to, he is violent in order to get power and control. The difference is not semantic, it is ideological. Okay? And a little bit further down, she recognises that the vast majority of the men with whom she worked didn't express any desire for power and control over the woman that they were living with whatsoever, and recognized then that they were at error with that. The really sad thing is that has not been recognized by, if I say the powers that be, I'm using those words again, but the powers that be, and it persists until this day, although the guru quite clearly stated and recognized that it wasn't there. If we look at some of the other statistics, then Johnson is a so-called feminist researcher, or sympathetic to feminism, certainly. And the statistics which I read and digest from him were that prior to separation, his research found 7 men per 1,000 that were intimate terrorists or coercive controllers, whichever of those two terms you prefer to use, and that 5 women per 1,000 were intimate terrorist coercive controllers prior to separation. Post-separation, the figure for men exploded enormously to 22% of men being coercive controllers and 4.7, I think it was, percent of women post-separation that became coercive controllers. So one can see that this, when men enter the battle then, and the battle is usually about access to the children who are very largely placed with the woman, that the men do begin to fight, and they do begin to become sort of setting out to win, and in a kind of war zone, which is what they're invited to do by the British court system. Inevitably, almost, they begin to start using all of the mechanisms which are at their disposal, as do the women. So a great deal of difficulty there, and a great deal of animosity is actually built up by, I think, the court system. But if we go back to the...
I wanted to also talk about the statistics, because I was thinking of the work of, John Archer, Louise Dixon, Nicola Kevin Graham, who in their various universities have their
Liz
research...
Bates as well,
and Liz Bates as well, their research shows much more
equality, symmetry between...
in terms of male and female violence. They even show that young women dating are likely to be more violent than young men dating. And then there's the American Centre for Disease Control, who quite recently, their research shows that gay men experience domestic abuse just as often, and lesbian partners experience it more so.
Yes, I think those statistics have been around for quite a long period of time, but of course, if they don't match what it is that you're wanting, then they're happily ignored.
Well, that kind of makes a nonsense, doesn't it, of the gender model, of looking at it through a gender lens.
Of course, the difficulty is, though, that if patriarchy is your game, then of course you can't have anything which contradicts that. And so, male abuse amongst males, so gay violence, if you like, and lesbian violence, obviously those are anathema to the feminist model. And just as is female violence. And probably for that reason, the accreditor Respect has actually, as far as I know, initiated no courses with female abusers. And in fact, female abusers tend to be sent on the Freedom Programme, which is largely focused on female victims of domestic violence. Which was how I came into contact with this book originally.
Absolutely.
From a female abuser, recognising herself as a female abuser, it was being insisted that she should go on the Freedom Programme for female victims.
Yes.
Interestingly enough.
And I was thinking also, if you're looking through that feminist lens, it is a feminist lens, that it's about keeping women under control, then you can't take any other causes into account, can you? So Pat Craven says drink, stress, unemployment, overwork, low self-esteem, insecurity are excuses. Whereas you and I as a therapist might say they're part of an explanation.
Of course,
and the most glaring omission is developmental and life experience trauma. There's no conceptualization of that within well, within the model so far,
we have. That's right. We've only seen one and two.
I
that's
think
correct.
We're probably anticipating what's to come. But
I think maybe yes by now. Yeah. And I think one of the other difficulties is it's always the men which have these problems. As a former couple counsellor, then of course we would see a lot of these problems also in women's hands as well. So, and
absolutely.
Very recently I was listening to a case where the woman of the relationship had a £300 a month gambling habit, and when the man, when the husband or partner attempted to put some boundaries around this, because the family just could not afford £300 a month in gambling, and men gamble as well. Don't get me wrong, and it needs to be managed. But then all of a sudden, then he's coercively controlling her by attempting to take away the finance with which she's gambling.
Right.
So, if the man was doing that, he would be absolutely guilty. But with the women doing that, or the woman doing that, then he's coercively controlling her, or attempting to coercively.
So there's a kind of double standard operating.
A kind of ridiculous thing which ignores the kind of problems which go on in couple relationships from top to bottom, really. That's a somewhat more extreme view. I mean, there are much more extreme views than that, and there are also much lighter situations than that. So I can think back to a very early client we had who required his tea on the table at 6:30 on the basis that if they were eating after 7 o'clock, that would cause him indigestion, and then he wouldn't be able to sleep. So those were things which he'd just been brought up with, presumably. His mother would say, well, we've got to eat at 6:30. That was what their family required, and so he just goes on willy-nilly and reproduces that in his own relationship. Yes. And is then very upset with his wife or partner when the food is not on the table at 6:30. And was that about being coercive and controlling? Goodness only knows, but I'm sure it could be seen as that if you chose to. Yeah.
Controlling is an element for sure.
Yes.
But it's a dynamic that people use as a survival strategy.
Yeah.
It's not a willful.
Not necessarily a willful thing. It's about divergent views about how something should happen. That's right. Neither person's got the right answer to that.
And it's often about not being able to manage an unpredictable environment or a change because the person hasn't got the emotion processing capacity to cope with that.
Yes, I think that's right. Yeah, so they're not able to remain flexible enough.
Exactly.
I think that would be
that's a good way of putting
terms.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it.
Yes, the dominator. Yeah. So, anything else that struck you out of that then, Sue?
Just one more thing. The idea that these behaviours are a product of society. Yeah. I think it's a very one-dimensional view. Yeah. And it leads to a very one-dimensional intervention. Yeah. It's all about beliefs. Yeah. The beliefs are a product of society. Yeah. We simply change people's beliefs, which we know as therapists. You can't maintain a changed belief under stress.
No, and a belief doesn't necessarily equate with behaviour anyway. So,
yeah, good point.
I think one of the other things which struck me in this, and I've forgotten what it was now, so I'll just stop it there for a moment. One of the other things which struck me from this was the way that it was being described that the men all learn the same language. Which reminds me of the way that parents often talk when they say, I can hear my mother saying exactly the same things that I'm saying to our children now. So and then there's that lovely song written, I'm the mum, I'm the mum, I'm the mum. I don't know whether you came across that, but to the sort of William Tell overture or something like that. Wash your teeth, do your thing.
Brush your hair.
Yeah, brush your hair. Do you this? Do you that? Do you think were you born in a barn? So all of that kind of stuff, which are kind of just regenerated or regurgitated aspects from an individual's own childhood. So. Interesting. Yeah,